For the past couple of months, President Donald Trump has been turning up the heat on the European Union with a series of sharp remarks and tough trade moves. It all started on February 10, 2025, when Trump signed an order slapping a 25% tariff on all steel imports. On top of that, he hiked tariffs on aluminum from 10% to 25%. This wiped out previous deals that had given some countries, including those in the EU, special exemptions. Now, every nation would have to pay the full price, starting March 12, 2025. The White House defended the decision, arguing that it was necessary to protect national security. They pointed fingers at what they called unfair global trade practices and an oversupply of metals that, in their view, put American industries at risk. But that wasn't the end of it. Just a week later, on February 18th, Trump upped the stakes again. This time, he announced plans to hit three major industries: cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors, with a hefty 25% tariff set to kick in on April 2, 2025. Since these industries are crucial to Europe's economy, the move sent shockwaves through the EU, raising fears about what it could mean for European businesses and trade relations. And that's not all. The Trump administration has also been pushing back hard against digital service taxes introduced by several EU nations, arguing that they unfairly target American tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Facebook. On February 21, 2025, President Donald Trump took another swing at Europe's tax policies, instructing his trade team to explore ways to fight back, including slapping on new tariffs. To Trump, these taxes weren't just another bureaucratic rule. He saw them as a direct attack on American tech companies like Apple and Meta, and he wasn't about to let them slide. His administration made it clear they were ready to protect U.S. businesses from what they viewed as unfair treatment by European governments. But Trump's frustration with the EU wasn't just about taxes. He had been vocal about his issues with Europe for a while. During a virtual speech at the World Economic Forum on January 23, 2025, he didn't hold back. He called out the EU for what he claimed were lopsided trade policies, strict regulations, and a lack of commitment to defense spending. He accused European leaders of putting up barriers that made it harder for American companies to compete, especially in the tech world. According to Trump, these policies weren't just inconvenient, they were deliberately designed to hurt U.S. businesses. And when asked about the possibility of placing tariffs on European goods, Trump didn't hesitate. "You want the real answer or the political answer?" he said. "Absolutely. Absolutely." His words sent a clear message. He wasn't happy with how the EU was treating the US, and he was more than willing to take action. Trump went even further, describing the EU's trade practices as outright unfair. "The European Union has treated us terribly," he declared, doubling down on his belief that Europe had been taking advantage of the United States for too long. President Donald Trump made it clear, if European nations don't step up their military spending to meet NATO's 2% target, they're on their own. He even went as far as saying he'd have no problem letting Russia do whatever the hell they want if those countries didn't pull their weight. But that wasn't the only warning shot. Trump also announced plans to slap a hefty 25% tariff on imported cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors. His goal: to push businesses to bring their manufacturing back to the US instead of relying on factories overseas. Europe, however, isn't taking these threats lightly. In fact, the EU is preparing to hit back harder than expected. As Trump moves forward with his plan to reinstate steep tariffs on European steel and aluminum, EU leaders are finalizing a strong counterattack. These tariffs, set at 25%, are expected to take effect as early as March 12th, and they mark yet another step in Trump's push to overhaul trade rules in favor of American industries. He insists foreign countries have been taking advantage of the US for too long, and he's determined to shift the balance. But from Europe's perspective, this isn't just a trade policy, it's a direct economic assault. And this time, the financial blow could be even bigger than what they faced in the 2018 trade war. Reports suggest that if additional products get caught in the crossfire, the total impact could reach a staggering 28 billion euros, roughly $29.3 billion. That's nearly 4 times what was at stake during the last round of Trump-era tariffs. Faced with this growing threat, EU officials are scrambling to finalize a response that is both tough and legally airtight. While they're determined to defend their industries, they're also weighing diplomatic options to see if there's any chance of cooling tensions before things spiral out of control. As the trade battle between the US and Europe heats up, the European Union is getting ready to strike back. Officials in Brussels are drawing up a fresh list of American products that could soon face extra taxes if Donald Trump moves forward with his latest round of tariffs. This isn't the EU's first time playing this game. Back in 2018, when Trump imposed tariffs on European exports, the EU fought back by targeting iconic American brands like Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Levi's jeans, companies with strong political ties in Washington. The strategy? Hit industries that matter to key US lawmakers and voters, making it harder for Trump to ignore the economic fallout. Now, the EU is preparing to dust off its old playbook. A list of US products that had previously been taxed during the last trade war but were temporarily suspended in 2021 is set to snap back into action. But this time, European officials are tweaking their strategy, making sure the new tariffs match the level of damage caused by Trump's latest moves. Before pulling the trigger, the EU is carefully calculating its next steps. Officials are analyzing how much pain these tariffs would inflict on American industries, whether European companies can easily find replacement suppliers, and how the whole situation might shake up their own economy. The original list of retaliatory tariffs covered a wide range of US exports, slapping extra charges ranging from 10% to 50% on everything from agricultural products like peanut butter, rice, and orange juice to industrial goods such as steel, aluminum, and motorboats. Even consumer favorites like bourbon whiskey, cosmetics, and designer jeans were hit, all in an effort to target industries based in politically important US states. These tariffs were formally laid out in EU regulations and had been put on hold as part of a temporary trade truce. But if no deal is reached between Washington and Brussels, they're set to automatically kick back in on March 31st, 2025. And that's not all. The EU isn't stopping at reinstating old tariffs. Officials are actively reviewing new categories of American goods to add to the hit list, widening the scope of their response. Behind closed doors, European officials are carefully deciding which American products to hit with new tariffs. While the final list is still in the works, insiders suggest that it could include key agricultural exports like soybeans and processed foods, industrial equipment such as automotive parts and heavy machinery, and well-known consumer brands that hold cultural and economic weight in the US. The strategy isn't random, it's highly calculated. EU leaders are focusing on products that will make the biggest economic impact, especially those tied to politically powerful regions in the US. The goal? To make Washington feel the pressure in ways that matter. But there's another layer to this approach: legality. The EU has to ensure its response doesn't break international trade rules. Any countermeasure must be structured in a way that justifies retaliation under World Trade Organization (WTO) guidelines. This means Europe can't just impose tariffs for the sake of revenge. It has to prove that the US violated fair trade agreements and that the response is proportional. This brewing standoff comes at a time when trade between the EU and the US is more critical than ever. The economic ties between the two sides run deep, with billions of euros worth of goods and services exchanged each year. In 2023 alone, total trade in goods between the two economic powerhouses reached 851 billion euros. Europe exported 503 billion euros worth of goods to the US, while importing 347 billion, resulting in a trade surplus of 157 billion euros in its favor. However, when it comes to services, the US had the upper hand, exporting 427 billion euros in services to Europe, while importing 319 billion, leaving the EU with a 109 billion euro trade deficit in this sector. Any disruption to this trade flow could have serious consequences. If the US follows through with new tariffs on European goods, those products will become pricier in American markets, potentially leading to fewer sales and economic losses for European exporters. At the same time, if the EU retaliates with tariffs of its own, American-made goods will get more expensive in Europe, possibly reducing demand and impacting US industries. This isn't the first time the two sides have clashed over tariffs. The situation echoes the 2018 trade war when the Trump administration imposed steep duties on European steel and aluminum, claiming national security concerns. At the time, the US hit steel imports with a 25% tariff and aluminum with a 10% tariff, sparking immediate backlash from the EU. Brussels didn't hold back. It fired back with tariffs of its own, targeting industries with strong political influence in the US. Products like motorcycles, denim, bourbon, orange juice, and steel-related goods were all subjected to extra duties, strategically chosen to pressure Trump in states where manufacturing and agriculture play a major role. Back in 2021, a temporary deal brokered under President Joe Biden cooled down tensions between the US and the European Union. As part of the agreement, the US rolled back some of its harsh trade penalties, replacing them with quota-based tariffs, while Europe hit pause on its planned retaliation. For a while, it seemed like both sides were willing to move past the trade battles that had shaken markets just a few years earlier. But with Donald Trump now eyeing a return to his aggressive trade stance, the EU is getting ready to push back. If the US reinstates its full tariffs, Brussels isn't planning to sit idly by. It's gearing up for a response that could once again throw transatlantic trade into chaos. For European businesses, the stakes are high. Industries like automotive manufacturing, machinery production, and food exports could take a major hit if new trade barriers make it harder to sell their products in the US. Some European companies are already looking for new suppliers and alternative markets to soften the blow. But shifting global supply chains isn't something that happens overnight. On the American side, things aren't looking much better. If Europe retaliates with its own trade penalties, major US industries, especially those with strong political ties, could suffer. That could spell trouble for Trump as he seeks to win back the White House, forcing him to deal with frustrated manufacturers, farmers, and business leaders who rely on European markets. And the damage wouldn't just be economic. A trade war between the US and Europe could unravel decades of cooperation between two of the world's largest economies. Beyond trade, tensions could spill into critical areas like defense partnerships, technology agreements, and energy collaboration, making it harder for both sides to work together on global challenges. The economic relationship between the US and Europe has deep roots. After World War II, the US played a key role in rebuilding war-torn European economies through the Marshall Plan, a massive financial aid program that provided over $13 billion in assistance. The goal was to stabilize Europe, modernize its industries, and prevent Soviet influence from spreading across the continent. That cooperation laid the foundation for decades of economic ties, shaping a partnership that helped both economies thrive. Now, as new tariffs loom, industries on both sides of the Atlantic face an uncertain future. Higher prices on consumer goods, disrupted supply chains, and shifting political alliances could reshape the way business is done between the US and Europe. The relationship between the United States and Europe has deep historical roots, shaped by war, recovery, and shared global interests. In the aftermath of World War II, much of Europe was in ruins, economies shattered, industries struggling, and political uncertainty looming. To help Europe get back on its feet, the US launched the Marshall Plan in 1948, an ambitious financial aid program that poured over $13 billion into rebuilding Western European nations. Factories restarted, cities were rebuilt, and trade began flowing again. But it wasn't just about economics. The US also saw this as a way to prevent Soviet influence from spreading across a weakened Europe. As Cold War tensions escalated, the need for a strong military alliance became clear. In 1949, NATO was born, a security pact that declared if one member was attacked, the rest would step in to defend it. With American military power backing the alliance, Western Europe had a protective shield against potential threats. At the same time, Europe was taking steps toward economic unity. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome established the European Economic Community, EEC, a move that laid the foundation for what would eventually become the European Union. Initially, the US was wary. After all, a unified European market could mean stronger competition for American businesses. But over time, Washington saw the benefits of a stable, economically powerful Europe that could act as a key trading partner. Through the 1960s and 1970s, economic ties between the US and Europe deepened, with trade and investment booming. As the Cold War drew to a close, the nature of their partnership began to shift. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 reshaped global politics. With the Soviet threat fading, transatlantic cooperation expanded beyond defense into broader economic and diplomatic collaboration. With the US and Europe closely linked in trade and security, leaders on both sides have worked over the years to strengthen their relationship. One key moment came in the early 1990s when they agreed to hold regular high-level talks, ensuring that decisions on foreign policy, security, and global trade were more coordinated. This set the stage for a more ambitious initiative in 1995, the New Transatlantic Agenda, NTA. Designed to deepen economic ties and promote international stability, the NTA expanded cooperation beyond just trade. It brought the US and the EU together to tackle big global issues, from terrorism and financial instability to climate change and peacekeeping efforts. 3 years later, in 1998, another major step was taken with the launch of the Transatlantic Economic Partnership, TEP. This initiative aimed to break down trade barriers, align regulations, and increase collaboration in fast-growing industries like technology and pharmaceuticals. Over time, these efforts laid the foundation for one of the most powerful economic relationships in the world. Today, the US and the EU are deeply connected through trade, with business between the two regions reaching record levels. In 2023 alone, the total value of goods exchanged was a staggering 851 billion euros. The EU sent 503 billion euros worth of goods to the US, while American exports to Europe totaled 347 billion euros. The trade mix reflects the strengths of both economies. Europe's biggest exports to the US include cars, industrial machinery, and pharmaceuticals, while the US supplies aerospace components, agricultural products, and energy resources to European markets. Services such as banking, technology, and tourism also play a huge role in their economic partnership. But despite this strong connection, trade tensions have been a recurring issue. One of the first major disputes erupted in 2002 when the US, under President George W. Bush, imposed steep tariffs on European steel imports, citing national security risks. The EU quickly hit back with retaliatory measures, and after a legal battle, the World Trade Organization ruled against the US, forcing it to drop the tariffs. A similar conflict resurfaced between 2018 and 2021 when President Donald Trump reintroduced tariffs on European steel and aluminum. In response, the EU targeted some of America's most iconic brands, slapping higher taxes on Harley-Davidson motorcycles, bourbon whiskey, and Levi's jeans, products with strong political and economic influence in the US. Though the Biden administration later eased these tensions, a new battleground has emerged: digital taxation. The EU has been pushing for stricter regulations on American tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, arguing that these companies benefit from European markets without paying their fair share in taxes. The United States has repeatedly pushed back against Europe's efforts to tax digital giants, arguing that these policies unfairly single out American companies. While the EU insists that tech firms operating within its borders should contribute more, Washington sees it as an attempt to siphon revenue from some of its biggest businesses. Beyond trade and economics, security remains a core pillar of the transatlantic relationship, with NATO serving as the backbone of military coordination. For years, the US has urged European allies to step up their defense spending, arguing that America shoulders too much of the financial burden. While Europe has taken steps toward building its own defense capabilities, the partnership remains strong, particularly in areas like intelligence sharing, counterterrorism, and joint military operations. Security cooperation took on new urgency after the September 11th attacks, leading to landmark agreements like the Passenger Name Record (PNR) Data Sharing Pact in 2007. This deal allowed U.S. authorities access to airline passenger data to help identify and prevent terrorist threats. Cybersecurity has also become a major focus, with both sides ramping up efforts to counter cyber attacks and digital espionage from hostile state actors. Climate policy, however, has been a roller coaster. The US and EU worked closely under the Obama administration to secure the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, only for Trump to withdraw from it years later, straining relations. Biden rejoined the deal in 2021, reviving hopes for stronger environmental cooperation. But with Trump's return to the White House, tensions have flared once again. His administration's direct talks with Russia over Ukraine, excluding the EU from key discussions, have left European leaders frustrated. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance's speech at the 2025 Munich Security Conference, which many saw as sympathetic to far-right movements in Europe, has only added fuel to the fire. On the trade front, Trump's decision to reintroduce tariffs on European car exports has set off another round of economic battles. In response, the EU has expanded its list of retaliatory tariffs, targeting U.S. industries with strong political influence in Washington. At the same time, talks are underway to establish a Transatlantic Digital Economy Agreement, TDEA, an effort to regulate tech trade and set new standards for data privacy. While both sides recognize the need for clear rules in the digital economy, disagreements over how to handle big tech companies could make negotiations challenging. If you found this video insightful, please be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.